Okay, good morning. My name is Curtis Campbell, Senior Marketing Manager with Hughes. We're certainly glad you've joined us this morning for our webinar discussing measuring the ROI of in-store digital signage. We're very fortunate to be joined by Adrian Weidman, who is a digital media strategist with over 35 years of experience in emerging digital media technologies. We're also joined by Mike Tippett, who's the Vice President and Head of Digital Media Business for Hughes. With that, we're going to go ahead and turn it directly over to Adrian, who's going to lead us in a brief discussion, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions. Now, in terms of housekeeping, there is a chat window. If you do have questions, please feel free to type them in that window. This session is being recorded, so if you would like to make sure you get a copy of it after, we will make sure it gets sent to you. So again, thank you for joining us, and we'll turn it over to Adrian.
Thank you, Curtis. Thank you all. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your Friday morning to join us here for the next 45 minutes or so. As Curtis said, we have a session here for measuring the ROI of in-store digital signage, a topic that's been discussed for years and years and years. And so hopefully we'll shed a little light on how that can actually be achieved. Just before we get started, a quick shout out to my brother-in-law. This chicken is actually real. He built it, and it sits on his garage roof, and it works. And I always loved it and wanted to incorporate it somehow into my presentation. So I started with the image and came up with the title. So shout out to Mike. So some of you. Oh. Are we locked up, Curtis? Oh, there we go. Sorry. Those of you in the audience, you might be out there asking yourself the question, why do I want to implement digital signage? Does it work? What is my ROI? Will this project match or exceed our internal rate of return? These questions have been asked over and over and over again, and hopefully today we'll shed some light on perhaps giving you a path forward to begin to answer some of these questions. Just a quick note as to who I am. Again, my name is Adrian Weidman. I've been an independent consultant in this space since 2003. I started in this world called digital signage in 1997. I co-authored a book with Laura Davis Taylor, Lighting Up the Aisle, Principles and Practices for In-Store Digital Media, which remains the only existing resource on how and why retail brands can harness emerging technologies to transform their in-store experiences. I've concentrated on the numbers part of this game, and years ago developed eValidate, which is a ROI modeling software tool. And recently, through an engagement I recently had, and we'll talk, I'll walk through a quick case study, developed what I call C-Clear, which is a content efficacy software tool that we'll walk through. My clients have included, as you can see, a partial list there. Today, the case study will focus on an engagement that I recently had with Dairy Queen. I also work as an advisor to two technology startups, one in the mobile proximity marketing space and another with working on using RFID in a retail supply chain management program. I founded my consultancy practice really on this fundamental question and comment really that was relayed to me many years ago with a Target executive in this thing that we call digital signage. And this comment has really stuck with me and fundamentally is accurate on all levels. As these projects move forward, if you can't measure the results, it's highly unlikely that these projects will ever get beyond the pilot stage. As these projects move up in an organization, as it gets closer to the C-suite, ultimately the question will be, did we sell more stuff? What is the ROI of this project? And if those questions, if those aren't positive numbers, the project simply will die on the vine. We've seen that over the last 15 years. We continue to see that. So hopefully we've focused in on how can we address this, how can we bring quantifiable, quantitative evidence to the table in order to fund these projects moving forward. As I mentioned, out of an engagement that I had with Dairy Queen, developed what I call C-Clear. And C-Clear is, as it says, it's a content efficacy and optimization process supported by proprietary software that leverages transactional sales data as a success metric. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I have found over the years that ultimately it's about selling stuff, and it is the universally understood success metric. That number is understood by everybody in the organization and accepted by everybody in the organization. We've all heard organizations that want to introduce digital signage as a way to enhance the customer experience or variations thereof. And while that is true, it is very difficult to get everybody around the table to agree on a success metric that actually will measure the value to the business. So I have found that at the end of the day, it is really about that POS, that sales data, that ultimately is the true measure. C-Clear, there's a couple of things we can look at. We can optimize content design, optimize display locations, optimize the communication strategy. What's the messaging strategy and where we were successful, and identify and optimize halo effects. Halo effects effectively are we may be promoting a particular product, but that product actually represents a broader category. And although we might be getting a particular sales lift on a product, on a specific product, it would also be nice if we actually lifted the entire category. And we'll make some, we'll show you how that works in a moment. Identify shopper behavior, optimize product and category design. Those two things are very important, as we found certainly at Dairy Queen. Optimizing promotions, and then what we also found in looking at some of these results, in many cases, it's the secondary and tertiary insights that were invaluable in terms of answering the question of why did this happen? We saw a sales lift or we didn't see a sales lift. Why did that happen? And once we started looking at the numbers, those as I say, those secondary, tertiary insights were extremely valuable in guiding a path forward. So as I said, I'll walk you through the Dairy Queen case study. Dairy Queen began to implement digital menu and promotional boards a little over 4 years ago. And within the context of their design, of course, they had the menu boards as we know them, but within that design, they had a promotional panel, which they used to, in particular, in the case of Dairy Queen, they had Blizzard of the Month. So they had very succinct programs on a monthly basis that they would highlight and promote. And the question, to their credit, they started a measurement program really right at the beginning of their digital menu board campaign. And the question ultimately, and that they were trying to ask is, are our promotional messages effective? In effect, did we sell more stuff? And if not, why? And if so, why? And of course, to what degree? If you can answer if you were able to get a sales lift or not a sales lift, you can do the math, basically, that leads you to that ultimate ROI calculation. And very specifically, wanting to look for quantitative evidence to support their short-term and long-term franchisee, as well as corporate initiatives. So as I mentioned earlier, sales are the success metric. It is universally understood, and I've found that although it's difficult to get access to an agreement to get access to that POS data, it is the one that will ultimately tip the scales, as it were, to move a project forward. So starting with that foundational piece, we defined what the experiment was. We defined what the process was, ran the numbers, and of course, as I said, we do the math, because that's what the data drives you towards. Normalize the results, and then optimize that content attribute and repeat. So, so what we did at sort of to get a little bit more granular here, we started with a creative brief. So we looked at what was the promotional calendar, and then we looked at their content design, which Dairy Queen was doing in-house at that point. And what we ended up doing is looking and identifying a test attribute. And for the sake of this discussion, I'm at least at liberty to share one of those attributes we looked at. And in the case of Dairy Queen, they have Blizzard of the Month. Each month they feature a different flavor or highlighted flavor. And of course, they feature this in this promotional panel, and in that design, they incorporated the price. And in Dairy Queen's franchisee world, there is no such thing as a list price. Each franchisee can essentially price that Blizzard for what they feel the market will bear. So you can imagine the pricing is all over the map. And for Dairy Queen corporate, those of you that are in that franchisee environment, there's this underlying tension between corporate and the franchisee. Corporate obviously wants to make sure there's a unity and consistency of the brand message across the enterprise, whereas the franchisee, they'd like to hold their business. They want to be in control of their business. So sharing information, particularly pricing information, is not necessarily shall we say, an open dialogue. So corporate doing content, each time they do a piece of content and they wanted pricing, they would have to interface with the franchisee, try to get the right pricing, make sure that their digital signage CMS, that they were publishing the right piece of content to the right locations, and that operationally was a bit of a nightmare. So we identified what is the actual effect. What does price do? Does it affect the ability to sell more stuff? Again, we looked at using, again, sales data as the success metric. We compiled the data through CCLAIR. So CCLAIR, we looked at identifying product SKUs, category SKUs, locations, and then all of the transactional data for those test stores. And ultimately, would get a number that would be associated with, did we sell more stuff, which then translate, is our digital signage program effective? So the first attribute that we looked at, as I mentioned, was price versus no price. So we're going to do a little experiment here this morning. I'll describe it, the piece of content again, and then we'll open up a window here where you folks can vote to determine and give us your thoughts back on, did the price increase sales? Did it decrease sales? Did it not affect sales? And so real quickly, I'm going to open this, and hopefully it works the way we designed it to do. There we go. So feel free to go to menti.com and use the code 893931. I'll open this window let it run for about a minute or so as you guys open up those browsers and make those votes. As you're doing that, again, this was a piece of content. It showed Blizzard of the Month. It was featured Blizzard flavor in their cup, and they wanted, it was simple graphics, small motion graphic, and then content or the price was used as an element in that design. So, good. I'll let this run a little bit. As you folks vote, we're seeing some people come in. That's great. Interesting. Good. Thanks, everybody. And now I'm going to hopefully get us back to, oh, come on. It worked. So I'll give you a quick rundown here. The test locations, we had 38 locations. Over the course of this program, we looked at a total of a little over 1,400 different specific SKUs within the Dairy Queen family. At the end of the almost a year, not quite a year, 8-month program, we were looking at 14 million records within those 38 locations. As I mentioned, we looked at products and categories. So in the case of Blizzard, there'd be a featured Blizzard that had a very particular SKU attached to it for that flavor. But of course, people could still walk into Dairy Queen and order whatever Blizzard they wanted. So all of those Blizzard flavors were part of the category called Blizzard. And then there was the product-specific Blizzard that was featured. So that gives you a sense of those two. We looked at in-store versus drive-through. Obviously, within all those transactions, we've all heard these statistics out there. The 60–70% of business comes through drive-through. We had to make sure that those transactions were not taken into account. And then we looked at street versus mall locations. So we saw that looked like 80-some% of folks thought that it actually increased the price. In fact, what we found after extensive, we actually ran that same test on 3 different months just to make sure. What we found was that using the price in the design that they were using effectively had no impact on sales. We got an overall bump on the promoted product and the category, but the actual attribute of price actually made no difference whatsoever. And so it allowed Dairy Queen, it gave them quantitative evidence so that they could work with their franchisee community, and they saved tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars just on operational efficiencies based on that piece of evidence. And it also gave Dairy Queen corporate quantitative evidence to actually communicate with the franchisees. Typically, the franchisees felt, you know, they want the price up there. And Dairy Queen now has some hard evidence to suggest that yes, promoting the product does give you a bump, but the attribute of price being shown on there really doesn't matter. We also found that it really amplified the importance of measuring both the product and the category. That in some cases, we actually saw content that it increased sales of the category, but not necessarily product. And that became a powerful tool in the sense of, you know, the franchisee owner, they like that. I mean, they love to be able to promote something, but actually see the entire category lift, not necessarily just the product. So it was really an interesting, shall we say, revelation, and it really stressed the importance of looking at product and category simultaneously. Secondary, I mentioned earlier, secondary discoveries were invaluable. We found some interesting insights, and I have to be a bit careful here because some of these are really considered, you know, competitive advantage for Dairy Queen, so I have to be a little careful what I say here, but I'll certainly go so far as to say that what we found was the environment that these screens live in play a very specific and noted role in the type of content that you display into those environments. I know that's a bit cryptic, but there's a direct correlation with the type of content that you're playing into the environment that you're playing. Again, very interesting insights literally based on looking at these sales numbers. And then lastly, many of these discoveries that we found actually led to a broader initiative within Dairy Queen to essentially redesign all of their digital media workflows, not just for digital signage, but to make sure that those media workflows for their in-store experience, we redesigned the whole way of how it all got essentially integrated between the drive-through, mobile, online, and it really led to not only a redesign of their media workflows, but also some restructuring in their organization to actually address how all of these channels were going to be essentially working for Dairy Queen, what I call 2.0. So watching my time here, just wanted to close it up and just go quickly through the quantitative evidence. It's universally understood and accepted, and it's not open for subjective interpretation. As I said, I've been in this space since 1997, and inevitably people start looking at digital signage and saying, yes, it enhances the shopping experience, the customer experience, and while all those may be true, you simply can't build. It's rare that you can build a business case that is going to hold up in the C-suite, or in many cases, we're talking essentially a multi-million-dollar initiative when we're talking rolling out a digital signage initiative. That decision is going to be made at the boardroom. And if the numbers don't support that initiative, we're trapped in what we've seen certainly over all these years, the number of science experiments and pilots that simply don't go anywhere. Using that POS data, I just find to be that is the success metric. It's what everybody understands, and if you can show that you can sell more stuff using this medium, the chances of moving forward into a rollout and much more a broader initiative is dramatically increased. As I mentioned earlier, it's really important to look at product and category. You'll find tremendous insight by balancing those two, shall we say, data points. And both those data points, if you understand sort of the retail ecosystem, where obviously specific brands love to see their product lift, equally the retailer loves to see category lift. So there's different drivers behind that, so it's really important to look at both because both have a value to different stakeholders in the decision-making process. The investment in the study more than paid for itself. We found that it really moved the needle. It gave Dairy Queen and that marketing department some clout. And as I say, it led to a much broader initiative in the redesign of their broader digital media workflows. And lastly, you know, those workflow designs. Inevitably, these numbers and the process by going through this kind of initiative, it leads to revelations, and it's based on actual evidence, which allows you to put a stake in the ground to move forward from that point. And I think with that, I thank you. As Curtis and Mike said, we want to leave it open for some questions and comments, if you will. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Yeah, actually, this is Curtis real quick. Okay. I personally appreciate your input, and yeah, exactly as you just said, we wanted to turn a few minutes over to Mike Tippett, who's not only got a couple questions, but also has some thoughts to add to this.
Thank you, guys. It's terrific to be here. Adrian, that was probably one of the most informational 30 minutes that I've seen in 10 years of working in 10+ years working in the digital signage business. And candidly, you were able to focus in on a case study, and so we greatly appreciate you and Dairy Queen for allowing some of that to be shared. I do have some questions I want to ask you and allow you to kind of respond to, following along with what you just shared with us. If you were standing in front of a room full of bright-eyed marketing people representing, retail and QSR and other I guess a broad range of retailers would be the best way to say it. So you've got 25 or 30 women and men in there, and each of them wants to go back to their company and they want to say, we need to use digital signage. What would you say to them, or what would you suggest be the way that they start the discussion internally? You shared with us, look, at the end of the day, the boardroom cares about one thing, and that's POS. Don't argue with you there. But is there a way or anything that you've seen in your experience to begin that dialogue that will then lead to, yes, okay, we're going to set up some things, we're going to do some measurements, and roll through the process? What would be your guidance to them to go back and start that discussion?
I think it's a really good question. I would say I'm going to answer it with a brief little story. About 5 years ago, I participated, was asked to help a survey. And this was a digital signage CMS vendor who thought they had a better mousetrap. And their approach was they wanted to conduct a survey to chief marketing officers. And we ran the survey, and one of the nuggets that fell out of that survey was that roughly 70 to 75% of the respondents to that survey recognized recognized digital signage and perceived its value, but in terms of the overall view of the world, from their perspective, they saw digital signage as but one, shall we say, one tool in the marketing and merchandising portfolio that was a subset of mobile. And this was 5 years ago. So that's sort of how you have to, that was sort of an aha moment for me. So to answer your question, I would say it's not starting at digital signage, but what is it that we want to achieve? What is our marketing mix? What is our marketing and merchandising mix? And can digital signage play a role? I mean, Mike, you and I, we've been in this at a long time, and we've seen it time after time after time. People, if you come at it thinking that you're going to, I want digital signage and I have to justify it, it typically doesn't work well if you take that approach, because now you're putting the cart before the horse. I think you have to look at the broader picture and say, what can digital signage actually play a role? Why is it going to play a role? And then approach it with what is, and we've heard this time after time after time, what is that messaging strategy, and can digital signage be a value proposition given our specific set of circumstances? That's my way of answering that question. I don't know if that helps.
No, that's great. That's great. So really, if I summarize what I just heard you say, you would say to this room full of marketing people, don't try to make digital signage stand simply on its own. Make it a component of your broader marketing, and then, everything you've just spent the last half hour talking about is a way to, validate if signage somewhat specifically and that broader marketing campaign have been successful.
Absolutely, and you can see that now. You can see that with the, we've seen a tremendous growth in these digital menu boards. Why is that? Because it plays into what and how the business operates. It's not an add-on. It's not an aside. It's fundamental to the way a QSR. I don't care if you walk into Tim Hortons or Burger King or McDonald's or Dairy Queen. You need a menu board. And now you can really start taking advantage of the promise of digital signage in terms of day parting, et cetera, in that environment. And whereas look at retail, in the pure retail space, yeah, we're seeing more and more of it, but it still struggles with what is that ROI, and does it fit, and does it work within all of our other paths? And when I say paths, I mean, online experience, your mobile experience, your social media experience, and one has to look at all of those experiences and see where, how, why, and if digital signage supports that collective experience.
Okay, so staying along those lines there, and I'll make a somewhat of an assumption that many of the audience members and those who listen to this discussion are trying to formulate a way in their own minds to come together and figure out how to calculate the ROI. I believe you mentioned that the DQ study was most of a year in length. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was. That part of the study was just under, basically 8 months.
Oh, okay. Well, do you, from your experience, not only at Dairy Queen but across other customers, do you recommend a minimum amount of time? And second to that minimum amount of time, whenever we do promotions, when we do marketing promotions, we put it up there, we watch it, we evaluate it, we refine it, we kind of have that circle of life there in a marketing program. do you recommend a minimum amount of time to study, and is there a minimum number of those cycles in there that you say, you know, don't negate or decrease the value of the study, but are important to kind of make it a valuable quantitative study?
So as most things, I guess the answer is it depends. So in that 8-month study, what we talked about identifying an attribute, and one that Dairy Queen has allowed me to talk about is that price versus no price. But each month, so we looked at, every month we looked at 1 to 2 different attributes that we identified. So price versus no price. Some other attributes we looked at were the use of people in conjunction with the product, video versus not video. We looked at a number of different attributes that we isolated. So each month, so in the Dairy Queen world, their flight is, using some broadcast programming language, was 4 weeks. So we looked at, for each cycle, even though the test period was 8 months, we essentially looked at each one of those tests was only 4 weeks. And the number of locations within the test that we identified were 38. What I've found is you can find results fairly quickly. In other words, a month of data in the Dairy Queen world it was a large number of transaction points. So you got to statistical significance pretty quickly. If you're selling 2 items a month, then you have a bit of a challenge, of course.
No, that's great. You gave me both answers there. You did 4-week studies, and you did that cycle. Maybe it wasn't to improve what we were doing in the previous 4 weeks. It was to test another version of it. But nonetheless, you know, you were running that marketing cycle there. So let me ask you kind of a side question here. When you have watched clients, without naming names and even segments, when you've watched clients put in digital signage, have you seen any who educate the employees or do something with maybe, you know, even educating the franchisees in certain places on how to maximize the fact that you just made this investment in that store or in that retail location? Is there any linkage or any, you know, good things that you've seen or bad things that you've seen that people should be aware of?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll answer it 2 ways. One, it's part of, ultimately it's part of the stakeholders. So I did a multi-year engagement with Lowe's, and in that environment, it became clear when we walked into that and they said, we want to do in-store digital media. And the only success metric, or I should say the only focus was, and an attitude was, we're a Fortune 50 retailer, we're just going to tell our brands, you know, how much this is going to cost them. And we stood up and said, if you do that, this project will fail. And what we spent, as I say, years working with them on was to literally develop a program that said, you're not going to get your ROI based on a single, shall we say, single internal stakeholder. And what we ended up doing, we got huge credos from senior management, is we identified a whole host of stakeholders, from training, human resource, loss prevention, marketing, merchandising, each one of them, we created a business case that each one of them would share the ROI load of an in-store program. So in the case of Lowe's, you know, training was, yes, you're absolutely right. We have this, we've paid for this infrastructure, we've got these screens, and inevitably in that environment, the manager of the day, before the store opened, everybody would crowd around that paint counter and, you know, have, here's what's going on, you know, messaging, you know, sort of the briefing before the day begins. And we had HR involved and training involved that they could actually use that screen that happened to be by the paint department to actually use either corporate promotions, here's a video clip of the president, et cetera, and Dairy Queen was not the same. Now, what happens is you have that discussion, it's trying to get all of those stakeholders to actually commit to leverage whatever that content piece. That's oftentimes the struggle. So the rationale is there, but the actual effort to actually put and take advantage of that is somewhat challenging in terms of getting all of those stakeholders to actually leverage and participate in those programs.
Well, at the risk of sounding somewhat self-serving, the employee communication aspect of retail business in specific, because of the high turnover and because of the disconnected nature of that, you know, significant workforce out there, it's a passion of mine to discuss exactly what you just said and the opportunity that's there. And what I would share with the audience is, if you are serious about trying to begin using digital media or to grow an investment in digital signage within your stores, your service branches, your locations, whatever the case may be, you absolutely should go and get stakeholders from HR, and if it's a separate piece, training, store operations, and so forth, and bring them together and make sure that they understand the power of what they have there. And I'll just give this simple and obvious example, but it is a picture that I think can't be ignored. In these businesses, we have 50, 60, 70% turnover. We have, as Adrian said earlier, the DQ example, 1,400 SKUs. How do I make this sandwich? How do I make this ice cream dessert? How do I make this? You have the ability to utilize those screens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If the location is open 18 or 20 hours a day, you've got time, you know, before the store opens or after the store closes. It is absolutely essential in my mind that you bring those stakeholders to the table and you show them what they can do as far as employee communication, employee engagement, and employee training using these same screens. Adrian's study and the tools that he's offering to make available and the services there will very much so help you prove the ROI against point-of-sale data. I would add on that you could then also be doing a study that says, look at what we were able to accomplish by communicating regularly. All of a sudden now, employees at every remote location can see and hear from the senior management of the company. Okay, they can hear from the CEO, message of the month, message of the quarter. They can hear from regional leadership. And if you're in a franchise organization, maybe that's not as important, but certainly the how to make this product, how to do this, how to handle these customer service situations are very, very critical. Adrian, I personally would like to thank you for sharing with that. And Curtis, with that, I thought, you know, if we have any questions from the audience or what have you, we can pass those along and wrap up.
Yeah, there's actually just we're close to the end of the window we have scheduled for today, so there is one question I think is particularly pertinent to what we're talking about here, and we will do our best to address the rest of the questions that will come in one-on-one directly with you. But this question I believe would probably be best answered by Adrian, but obviously Tip, if you have some insight on this, great. But one of the questions says, do you have insight on how animated promotional pieces measure against static promotional pieces and in regards to a digital screen?
I do. unfortunately, I can't, I'm not at liberty to share a Dairy Queen specific. But what I can share with you is, again, to me, the story is always worth 10,000 words. There was at Best Buy years ago, if you recall, when the federal broadcast FCC was going to all digital broadcast, they were basically going to eliminate the analog signal. Best Buy ran an interesting internal study and for their in-store media, and they have a very elaborate in-store production team. And what the sort of the blind test was, they went to the in-store production team and say, we want something to broadcast or to put on our in-store media, in-store digital signage, talking about this transition from analog to digital. So the internal production team, and they got a significant budget. It was north of $100,000. And they went and did they went out to LA, they shot video, they did this whole elaborate piece and ended up with essentially a 30-second spot. And essentially the group, the digital signage team, they literally went to someone in the group that had some basically graphics chops, and simply created a static graphic that basically said Best Buy's colors are yellow and dark blue. So it was yellow letters on a dark blue background, and it's big bold letters. It simply said, is your TV digital ready? Ask an associate. That was it. And the gist of the story was that that static graphic, that message, was far more powerful and far more effective than a $100,000 30-second spot that was elaborately produced. So I share that, and I'll transition and say that I can share the same experience. I could tell the same story at Lowe's, and I could certainly tell a similar story at Dairy Queen. So that isn't to say that some pieces that had motion graphics obviously went better and performed better, but it was specific to the environment and specific to the audience. So it's not just a simple answer, animation works, static graphics works or doesn't work. It's what is the message and how does it relate to the environment and the viewer behavior in that environment. Those all come together to actually answer that question. So that's my answer to that.
Perfect. No, that's very insightful. Thank you very much. Well, hey, we have exhausted the window we have set up for this morning. So, Adrian, I certainly appreciate your time for this morning, taking some time out of your busy schedule. And I certainly appreciate everyone that's taken time out of their schedule to join us and participate in this webinar. So, again, thank you. And we will be sending out a recording to this webinar. And we look forward to working with you in any way, shape, or form that we can. Thank you so much, and have a great day and a great weekend. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.